I never thought my own daughter would be capable of humiliating me like that, in front of a judge, in front of strangers, in front of everyone. There I was, Eleanor, 65 years old, sitting on that cold courtroom bench, listening to Sarah utter the cruelest words a mother can hear. Your Honor, my mother is no longer capable of managing her own affairs. She doesn't even have money to support herself. She lives like a pauper in that old house, with no resources, nothing. Her voice sounded so confident, so convincing, that for a moment I even doubted my own reality. Tears burned my eyes, but I swallowed them. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. Not there, not in front of everyone. David, my son-in-law, nodded from his seat, as if he were the most concerned man in the world. That hypocrite never lifted a finger to help me. He always saw me as a nuisance in his wife's life. It's for her own good, Your Honor. She needs constant supervision. She can't continue living alone under these conditions. I wanted to get up and shout that he knew absolutely nothing about my conditions, that he had never bothered to ask me how I really was. But there he was, acting like the model son-in-law, concerned for his mother-in-law's well-being. Sarah's lawyer continued his poisonous speech. Mrs. Eleanor has shown clear signs of financial deterioration. Her house is in disrepair. She has no visible income, and frankly, Your Honor, we believe she needs to be placed under guardianship for her own protection. Every word was like a stab. Guardianship for me, after all I had worked for, all I had built, all I had sacrificed for that family. I felt so small at that moment, so invisible, as if my whole life had been worth nothing. The room was full of people looking at me with pity. I could feel their eyes on me, judging me, evaluating me as if I were a broken object that needed to be repaired or discarded. Sarah kept talking, each sentence more hurtful than the last. My mother doesn't understand the value of money, Your Honor. She lives in a fantasy where she believes everything is fine, but the reality is she's on the verge of destitution. Fantasy. She called me fanciful, the child I raised, to whom I gave everything, who never had to worry about anything because I took care of everything. My granddaughter, Emily, was sitting at the back of the room. She was the only one looking at me with love, with understanding. Her green eyes were full of tears, and it broke my heart to see her suffer through this situation. She knew something wasn't right, that her mother was lying, but she was only a 16-year-old teenager. What could she do against all this legal machinery Sarah had set in motion? I smiled slightly, trying to reassure her, but inside I felt like I was crumbling piece by piece. The judge looked at me with that expression I had seen so many times directed at the elderly, a mixture of compassion and condescension. Mrs. Eleanor, do you have anything to say in your defense? His voice was gentle, but I could perceive he had already made a decision. Everyone had made a decision. I was the crazy old lady who didn't know how to manage her life, who needed others to decide for her. I rose slowly, feeling the weight of my 65 years on my shoulders. Your Honor, I began, but Sarah interrupted me immediately. Your Honor, as you can see, my mother is confused. She can't even articulate a coherent answer. The room filled with murmurs. Some people even chuckled under their breath. They laughed at me, who had built everything from scratch, who had worked day and night to give my family a decent life. The sound of those laughs pierced my soul like knives. It was the greatest humiliation of my life, and it came from the person I loved most in the world, my own daughter. David approached Sarah and whispered something in her ear. She nodded and turned back to the judge. Your Honor, my husband and I are prepared to take charge of the few assets my mother may have. It's not much, but we will do everything in our power to ensure her a dignified end. A dignified end. They were talking to me as if I were already dead, as if my life had ended, and all that was left was to wait to be buried. Rage began to grow inside me, but I kept it controlled. It wasn't time yet. The defense attorney Sarah had hired to represent me seemed more interested in his phone than in my case. He had obviously been bought or convinced that it was better not to complicate things. Every time I tried to speak, he silenced me with gestures, as if my voice didn't matter, as if my words were irrelevant. It was clear that everything was arranged, that this hearing was just a formality before they declared me incompetent, and Sarah took control of everything. But there was something none of them knew, something that would change everything. Over the past few months, I had noticed changes in Sarah that deeply worried me. She was no longer the sweet girl I had raised, but a bitter and resentful woman who seemed to blame me for all her problems. It all started after I became a widow 2 years ago. My husband, Sarah's father, had been the emotional support of the family, and when he died, something broke in her. But instead of drawing closer to me to comfort each other, Sarah became cold and distant. She began to question every decision I made, every dollar I spent, every move I made in my own home. "Mom, you can't keep living like this," she would tell me constantly. "This house is too big for you. You spend too much on unnecessary things. You don't have a fixed income." Her words were like small daggers that pierced my heart every time she came to visit me. David supported her in everything, of course. He saw in my situation a golden opportunity. He knew that my house was in a highly valued area of the city, and his eyes lit up every time he talked about what we could do with that money if we sold it. The pressure started subtly. First, there were comments about my age, about how dangerous it was for an older woman to live alone. Then they started bringing brochures of retirement communities, beautiful places where you could make friends your age, Mom. The mere idea made my stomach churn. I wasn't ready to be put away in a place like that, as if I were a useless object to be stored until it completely broke down. But what hurt me most was seeing how Sarah had changed with Emily, my granddaughter. Before, we were very close. Emily would come to visit me every weekend. She would tell me her secrets, her dreams, her problems at school. But Sarah started limiting those visits. "Grandma is too busy," she would say, or, "We don't want to bother her." It was a lie, of course. I was never too busy for my granddaughter. Emily was the light of my eyes, the only reason it was worth continuing to fight. One afternoon, Emily managed to sneak away and came to see me. She was crying. "Grandma, Mom says you're going crazy, that you forget things, that you can't take care of yourself anymore, but I know it's not true. You always remember everything. You're always fine." Her words broke my heart because they confirmed what I already suspected. Sarah was setting the stage for what would happen in court. She was building a narrative in which I was a senile and incapable old woman. "Don't worry, my love," I told her, hugging her tight. "Things will be all right. I just need you to trust me, okay?" Emily nodded, but I could see the fear in her eyes. She knew something terrible was about to happen, even if she didn't understand exactly what. That night, after she left, I stayed awake thinking about everything I had built over the years, everything I had kept secret to protect my family. You see, Sarah knew nothing about my real life. To her, I was simply her widowed mother who lived off her father's pension and some savings. I never told her about the investments I had made for 40 years, about the properties I had discreetly bought in different states and countries, about the empire I had built, brick by brick, while she was growing up. I did it that way because I believed it was best, because I wanted my children to strive for their own achievements, not to depend on my money to make something of their lives. My late husband knew part of the truth, but he respected my decision to maintain discretion. He knew I had some businesses, but I never gave him all the details. It was my secret, my personal project, my way of securing the family's future without creating dependence or laziness. For decades, while Sarah went to school, to college, got married, and had Emily, I continued working in silence, expanding my investments, buying properties in strategic locations. I had apartment buildings in Miami, Florida, summer homes in Costa Rica, commercial spaces in Panama City, land in Colombia that had appreciated incredibly. In Mexico, I had bought 3 beachfront properties that were now worth a fortune. I also had investments in Spain and Portugal, countries where real estate demand never stopped growing. All this I had done with the help of Oliver, my lifelong accountant and financial advisor, a discreet and trustworthy man who had been like a brother to me. Oliver knew every detail of my finances. He managed my accounts, oversaw the rentals, reinvested the profits. He was the only one who knew that my monthly income exceeded $80,000 from all my properties and investments. He was the only one who understood why I lived so simply despite having so much money. "Eleanor," Oliver would often tell me, Your children should know the truth. It's unfair that they think you're in poverty when you're one of the most successful women I know." But I always answered him the same way. "Oliver, money changes people. I've seen families destroyed by inheritance, children who become lazy because they know their parents are going to support them, grandchildren who grow up without values because they never had to fight for anything. I don't want that for Sarah or for Emily." He respected my decision, although he didn't always agree. Now, sitting in that courtroom, listening to my own daughter talk about me as if I were a pauper, I began to wonder if I had made the right decision. Sarah continued her masterful performance. "Your Honor, my mother refuses to admit her situation. She insists everything is fine when it clearly isn't. She doesn't have adequate heating in winter. She eats very little to save money. She wears old, patched clothes. It's heartbreaking to see how she's deteriorating out of pride." Every word was a perfectly constructed lie. I didn't have heating because I preferred to wear sweaters. I ate little because I took care of my health. I wore simple clothes because I didn't need to impress anyone. David stood up to add his testimony. "Your Honor, my mother-in-law constantly rejects our help. When we offer her money for house repairs, she says she doesn't need it. When we suggest she move to a smaller, more manageable place, she gets angry and throws us out of her house. She's clearly in denial about her financial situation." The room murmured with understanding. Everyone thought I was a stubborn, proud old woman who preferred to suffer rather than accept help. What none of them understood was that I rejected their help because I knew exactly what their true intentions were. They didn't want to help me. They wanted to control me. They wanted me to sell my house so they could keep the money. They wanted me to move to a retirement community so they could forget about me. They wanted me to sign papers that would give them power over my decisions. All this while, they believed I had nothing more than that house and some insignificant savings. The judge seemed increasingly convinced that Sarah was right. His questions to me were condescending, as if he were talking to a small child who didn't understand what was happening around her. "Mrs. Eleanor, do you understand why your family is concerned?" He asked me with that soft voice they use with the mentally ill. I wanted to scream that I understood perfectly, that what I didn't understand was how my own daughter had become so greedy and cruel. But I remained silent, waiting for the perfect moment. I knew Oliver was on his way. I had sent him a message before entering the courtroom, activating the plan we had discussed for months. If things ever reached this extreme, if Sarah really tried to declare me incompetent, Oliver had specific instructions on what to do. He had all the documents, all the papers, all the evidence of who I really was and what I had built throughout my life. The hearing continued, and I could feel the trap Sarah had so carefully laid closing in. But she didn't know that I also had a trap, a much more powerful one that would change everything in a matter of minutes. Sarah's lawyer pulled out a folder full of papers and began to present what he called evidence of my incapacity. "Your Honor, we have documented multiple incidents that demonstrate Mrs. Eleanor's mental and financial deterioration." My heart raced. What kind of evidence could they have? What lies had they fabricated to justify this farce? The man began to read a list that chilled my blood. Mrs. Eleanor forgets to pay bills on time. She has been seen talking to herself in the garden. She buys excessive food that later spoils, and according to neighbor testimonies, she sometimes leaves home without remembering where she was going. Each accusation was a cruel distortion of reality. Yes, sometimes I paid bills a few days late, but not because I forgot them, but because I reviewed each one meticulously before paying them. That was a habit I had developed over years to control my expenses, not a sign of dementia. And yes, I talked in the garden, but not to myself, but on the phone with Oliver while walking among my plants, discussing investments and financial strategies. The neighbors obviously couldn't hear my phone conversations from their windows. The story of the spoiled food was particularly cruel. I bought large quantities of vegetables and fruits because I distributed them among needy families in the neighborhood. There was a lady with 3 children who worked as a housekeeper, and I brought her bags of food every week. There was also an elderly man who lived alone 2 blocks down, and I made sure he had fresh food. But of course, Sarah never bothered to ask me why I bought so much. She simply assumed the worst and used it against me. Furthermore, the lawyer continued, Mrs. Eleanor has begun to show signs of paranoia. She tells her granddaughter that there are things she cannot tell, that she has important secrets, and that someday everything will be revealed. These are clear indicators of delusional thinking in elderly people. The room murmured with concern. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Emily had told them those conversations. My own granddaughter had been interrogated and manipulated to provide ammunition against me. I looked back and saw Emily with tears streaming down her cheeks. Her eyes pleaded for forgiveness. I could read the words on her lips. I'm sorry, Grandma. My poor granddaughter had been used as a pawn in her mother's dirty game. Sarah had probably pressured her, made her feel guilty, convinced her that telling those details would help Grandma. Emily had no idea that every word she had innocently said would be distorted and used as evidence of my supposed dementia. Sarah stood up again. Your Honor, my mother was always a very hard-working and responsible woman. That's why this situation is so painful for our family. To see her deteriorate, to lose the ability to manage her life is heartbreaking. But we cannot allow pride to prevent us from doing the right thing. She needs professional help. She needs someone to make responsible decisions for her before it's too late. Her performance was perfect. The tears in her eyes seemed genuine. Her voice trembled with just the right emotion. If I didn't know the truth, I might even have believed her story. The judge seemed completely convinced. I understand the difficulty of this situation, Mrs. Sarah. It's clear that you love your mother and want the best for her. He turned to me with that condescending look I already knew too well. Mrs. Eleanor, do you understand your family's concerns? Are you willing to accept the help they offer? It was a trap question. If I said yes, I would be admitting that I needed help and justifying the guardianship. If I said no, I would confirm the narrative that I was a stubborn and delusional old woman. Your Honor, I began with a firm voice, I perfectly understand my family's concerns. I also perfectly understand their motivations. Sarah shot me a warning glance, as if telling me not to say anything that could complicate her plans, but I had already come too far. However, I believe there is important information that must be considered before making any decision about my future. Sarah's lawyer immediately stood up. Your Honor, as you can see, Mrs. Eleanor is confused about the nature of these proceedings. There is no additional relevant information. The facts are clear and documented. But I was not going to be silenced this time. Your Honor, I respectfully request that additional documentation relevant to this case be allowed to be presented. My accountant, Mr. Oliver, has updated financial information that I believe would significantly change this court's perspective. The mention of Oliver made Sarah turn slightly pale. She knew who he was. She knew he had been the family's accountant for decades, but she had no idea the extent of his knowledge about my affairs. David leaned toward her and whispered something in her ear. I could see the concern growing on their faces. Your Honor, Sarah's lawyer said quickly, we don't see the relevance of additional financial information. We have already established that Mrs. Eleanor has no significant resources. But the judge seemed intrigued by my request. Mrs. Eleanor, are you saying that you have financial documentation that has not been presented in this court? I nodded firmly. Yes, Your Honor, very relevant documentation. The judge looked at his watch and then toward the courtroom door. Is your accountant present today? At that perfect moment, as if it had been choreographed, the courtroom doors opened and Oliver walked in. He was a 60-year-old man, distinguished, with perfectly combed gray hair and an elegant suit that radiated professionalism and success. He carried a black leather briefcase and walked with the confidence of someone who had spent decades managing the finances of very important people. His presence immediately changed the atmosphere of the room. This was not the accountant of a poor, incapable old woman. This was clearly a high-level professional. Excuse the interruption, Your Honor, Oliver said with a clear, authoritative voice. I am Oliver Hayes, a certified public accountant and financial advisor to Mrs. Eleanor for the past 25 years. I understand that matters related to my client's financial capacity are being discussed, and I have crucial information that must be considered before any decision is made. Sarah's lawyer immediately stood up. Your Honor, this is irregular. Unscheduled witnesses cannot be allowed. But the judge raised his hand to silence him. Mr. Hayes, what kind of information do you have? Oliver opened his briefcase and took out a thick folder full of perfectly organized documents. Your Honor, I have here Mrs. Eleanor's complete financial statements, including properties, investments, and monthly income flow. Information that, I'm afraid, significantly contradicts the claims that have been made about her economic situation. The silence in the room was deafening. Sarah had lost all color in her face. David seemed to have swallowed his tongue. Even the lawyer who supposedly represented me seemed surprised. I kept my expression serene, but inside, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction, because finally the truth was going to come to light. Sadness, because it had come to this point with my own family. Your Honor, Oliver continued, Mrs. Eleanor not only does not need financial guardianship, but she is, in fact, one of my most successful clients. Her monthly income exceeds $80,000 from real estate properties in 8 different countries and various high-yield investments. Far from being an incapable old woman, she is a shrewd businesswoman who has built a considerable empire over the past 4 decades. Oliver's words fell like bombs in the room. I could hear stifled gasps, murmurs of disbelief, the sound of papers falling to the floor. Sarah had turned completely pale and clung to David's arm as if she were about to faint. The judge's expression had changed completely, from condescending compassion to professional intrigue. It was the moment I had been waiting for months. The truth was finally coming to light. The judge leaned forward, clearly fascinated by this unexpected turn. Mr. Hayes, are you saying that Mrs. Eleanor owns properties valued at several $1 million? Oliver nodded with professional calm. Exactly, Your Honor. Mrs. Eleanor possesses a diversified real estate portfolio that includes apartment buildings in Miami valued at $3.2 million, vacation homes in Costa Rica valued at $1.8 million, commercial premises in downtown Panama City that generate monthly rents of $12,000, and land in Colombia that has appreciated 400% in the last 10 years. Sarah stood up abruptly, her face red with anger and humiliation. That's impossible. My mother has no money. She lives like a pauper. Her voice had lost all composure, all the calculated elegance she had shown during the hearing. Now she sounded like what she really was, a desperate woman watching her plan crumble before her eyes. Your Honor, this has to be some kind of scam. My mother cannot have that money. Mrs. Sarah, the judge said in a firm voice, please maintain your composure in my courtroom. Then he turned to Oliver. Mr. Hayes, can you provide documentation to support these claims? Oliver smiled slightly and began to pull documents from his briefcase. Of course, Your Honor. Here are the property deeds, bank statements, rental agreements, and most recent appraisal reports, all duly authenticated and certified. As Oliver organized the documents on the table, I watched my family's faces. Sarah seemed to be in shock. Her mouth opened and closed without making sounds. David had started to sweat profusely and was constantly loosening his tie. His dream of seizing my few assets had turned into the nightmare of discovering that they had tried to defraud a multimillionaire. The lawyer Sarah had hired to represent me seemed to want to disappear under the table. Your Honor, Oliver continued, I must also mention that Mrs. Eleanor owns 3 beachfront properties in Mexico, 2 villas in Spain, and a commercial building in Portugal. Additionally, she has investments in mutual funds, treasury bonds, and stocks that generate significant monthly dividends. Her total net worth exceeds $15 million. The number floated in the air like a bomb that had exploded in slow motion. The silence in the room was absolute. Even the court clerk had stopped writing and looked wide-eyed. $15 million. The indigent old woman who needed guardianship had $15 million. The irony was so perfect it almost made me laugh, but I held back. This was not a time to celebrate. It was a time for the truth to be fully established. Sarah finally found her voice, though it was barely a broken whisper. But Mom, you always said you had no money. You always lived so simply. You never bought expensive things. You never traveled. You never—" Her voice trailed off as she began to understand the magnitude of what she had done. She had accused her millionaire mother of being an incapable old woman who needed guardianship. "Sarah," I said in a calm but firm voice, "I lived simply because I chose to. I lived discreetly because I wanted you and Emily to learn the value of work, of humility, of earning things by your own merit. I never told you about the money because I hoped you would be a good person without needing to know that there was an inheritance waiting for you." Tears began to roll down my cheeks, not from sadness, but from deep disappointment. The judge intervened. "Mr. Hayes, has Mrs. Eleanor been personally managing these investments and properties?" Oliver nodded emphatically. "Absolutely, Your Honor. Mrs. Eleanor is one of the shrewdest investors I have known in my 30-year career. Every purchase decision, every investment strategy, every financial move has been personally initiated and approved by her. Far from showing mental deterioration, her recent decisions have been particularly brilliant." "Indeed," Oliver continued. "Just 3 months ago, Mrs. Eleanor identified an investment opportunity in commercial real estate in Panama that has generated a 20% return in just 90 days. Her capacity for market analysis and financial decision-making is completely intact. The contrast between this description and the image of a senile old woman Sarah had painted was so extreme that it was almost comical." David finally spoke in a trembling voice. But Mrs. Eleanor, you never told us anything. We always thought that I was poor." I completed his sentence. "Yes, David, I know. And the question is, why did you never bother to ask me directly about my situation instead of assuming and planning how to seize what you believed were my only assets?" His eyes filled with panic when he realized that I had perfectly understood their intentions from the beginning. "Your Honor," Oliver said, "I must also report that Mrs. Eleanor has been considering making significant donations to various charitable organizations. She had planned to leave part of her estate to her family, of course, but she also wanted to contribute to educational and social aid causes. However, recent events have made her reconsider these decisions." The message was clear. Not only had they lost the opportunity to control my assets, but they had put their own inheritance at risk. Sarah slumped in her chair as if all her strength had abandoned her. "Mom, I didn't know. I thought that—" But her words sounded hollow, because the reality was that she had never asked, never shown genuine interest in my well-being, only in what she could get from me. For months she had planned this hearing. She had built lies about my supposed incapacity. She had manipulated her own daughter to obtain testimonies against me. "Your Honor," Oliver continued, "there is another important aspect that must be considered. Mrs. Eleanor has maintained this financial discretion not due to mental deterioration or paranoia, but due to a very calculated strategy of asset and family protection. She wanted to ensure that her heirs developed character and their own work before having access to the family wealth. It was exactly correct. That had been my philosophy for decades. Sarah's lawyer finally tried to regain some control over the situation. Your Honor, even if these documents are authentic, that doesn't change the fact that Mrs. Eleanor has shown erratic behaviors, and—" But Oliver interrupted him gently. "Are you referring to behaviors like making successful multi-million-dollar investments, or to behaviors like maintaining regular correspondence with property managers in 8 different countries? Or perhaps you are referring to her habit of personally reviewing every monthly financial statement I send her?" The destruction of Sarah's narrative was complete. Every piece of evidence of my supposed incapacity had been recontextualized as signs of a brilliant financial mind operating in secret. My mysterious conversations in the garden were consultations about international investments. My excessive food purchases were acts of charity toward needy neighbors. My refusal to accept help was the logical response of a woman who knew she didn't need it. The judge had been furiously taking notes throughout Oliver's presentation. He finally looked up and gave me a completely different expression, full of respect and professional curiosity. "Mrs. Eleanor, is there anything you would like to tell this court about this situation?" It was my moment. After months of humiliations, of lies, of being treated like a senile old woman, I finally had the opportunity to speak in my own voice and be heard with respect. I rose slowly, not out of weakness, but out of dignity. It was time for everyone to understand who Eleanor really was, and why the time had come for the truth to fully come to light. I stood with all the dignity I had accumulated over 65 years of life, feeling for the first time in months that my voice was going to be heard with the respect it deserved. Your Honor, for the past 40 years, I have built my wealth with hard work, intelligent decisions, and great discretion. I never flaunted my wealth because I firmly believed that money does not define a person's character. But unfortunately, I have discovered that the lack of money doesn't define it either. What truly defines character is how one treats their loved ones when they believe they have nothing to offer. Sarah buried her face in her hands, but I continued mercilessly. My daughter came to this court today to declare me incompetent, not out of genuine love or concern, but because she wanted to seize what she believed were my only assets, my house. For months, she pressured me to sell it. She brought me brochures for nursing homes. She limited my granddaughter's visits, and she built a systematic campaign to convince everyone that I had lost my mind. All this without ever asking me directly about my real situation. Your Honor, Sarah's lawyer interrupted desperately. My client acted in good faith, concerned for her mother's well-being. But I raised my hand to stop him. No, sir. Your client acted out of greed. If she had really been concerned about my well-being, she would have talked to me. She would have asked questions. She would have spent time with me to assess my actual mental state. Instead, she conspired to declare me incompetent based on assumptions and lies. Allow me to tell this court what really happened during these last few months, I continued, feeling the strength return to my voice. Sarah began to visit me more frequently, but not to accompany me in my widowhood, but to inspect my house, evaluate its value, and look for evidence that I couldn't take care of myself. She checked my refrigerator to see what food I had. She looked at my accounts when I wasn't watching, and she asked leading questions to try to make me say something she could use against me. Sarah lifted her head and looked at me with tears in her eyes. Mom, I just wanted to help you. But her voice broke because she knew I was right. Sarah, if you had wanted to help me, you would have asked me what I needed. If you had wanted to help me, you would have respected my decisions about my own life. If you had wanted to help me, you would not have manipulated your own daughter to obtain testimony against me. The judge turned to Sarah with a serious expression. Mrs. Sarah, is it true that you interrogated your minor daughter to obtain information about her grandmother? Sarah stammered. I just asked her if Grandma had said strange things. And you used that information to build a case of mental incompetence without verifying the facts, the judge insisted. Sarah couldn't answer. Your Honor, I continued, my granddaughter Emily was used as a pawn in this dirty game. A 16-year-old teenager was manipulated to provide evidence against her own grandmother, without understanding that her innocent words would be distorted to justify declaring me incompetent. This is not only cruel to me, but profoundly harmful to a minor who loves her grandmother and does not understand the betrayal she was involved in. I looked toward Emily, who was crying silently at the back of the room. Emily, my love, I want you to know that I don't blame you for anything. You were honest when asked about our conversations. You didn't know your words would be used to harm me. The mistake was not yours. It was the adults who put you in that position. Emily nodded through tears, and I could see something akin to relief in her eyes. Your Honor, Oliver said, I would like to add that throughout all these years, Mrs. Eleanor has demonstrated an exceptional capacity for long-term planning. Not only did she build her wealth, but she also established educational trusts for her grandchildren, emergency funds for needy family members, and scheduled donations for charities. A person with mental deterioration could not have orchestrated such complex and effective financial strategies. Furthermore, Oliver continued, Mrs. Eleanor is fluent in 3 languages, which has allowed her to negotiate directly with sellers and buyers in different countries. Just 2 weeks ago, she had a 2-hour video conference with real estate developers in Spain, discussing the technical details of a renovation that will increase the value of her properties there by 30%. These are not behaviors of a person with impaired mental capacity. David finally found his voice, although it trembled noticeably. Mrs. Eleanor, if you had so much money, why did you live so austerely? It was a question that completely revealed his mentality. For him, having money necessarily meant spending it on visible luxuries. David, I replied with a sad smile, I lived simply because I found happiness in simple things. I didn't need a luxurious car to feel valuable. I didn't need expensive clothes to know who I was. I didn't need a huge house to feel at home. But more importantly, I continued, I lived discreetly because I wanted to teach my family correct values. I wanted Sarah to work for her own achievements. I wanted Emily to learn that happiness doesn't come from money, but from character. I wanted all of you to love me for who I was, not for what I had. Unfortunately, my experiment failed. The words fell like stones into still water. Your Honor, Sarah's lawyer said with a desperate voice. Even if these documents are authentic, the behavior of hiding wealth can be interpreted as a sign of paranoia or... But Oliver interrupted him firmly. Are you suggesting that discreet estate planning is evidence of mental illness? Because in that case, I would have to declare most of my high-net-worth clients incompetent, including several judges, doctors, and prominent businessmen in this city. The judge had heard enough. Counselor, I suggest you stop there. Mrs. Eleanor's age is irrelevant when she has demonstrated mental capacity superior to that of many people half her age. If you continue down that path, you could be delving into age discrimination, which is illegal. Your Honor, Oliver said, I would like to present additional evidence that demonstrates not only Mrs. Eleanor's competence, but her extraordinary foresight. He pulled another folder from his briefcase. These are the documents for 3 educational trusts that Mrs. Eleanor established 5 years ago for her future grandchildren, including one specifically for Emily. The funds have grown significantly and are designed to ensure that future generations have access to higher education without depending on their parents. Emily looked up, wide-eyed, at the mention of her name. It was the first time she had heard about the trust I had established for her. Yes, my love, I told her directly. Your grandma, poor and incompetent, made sure you have money for college, for graduate studies, for any education you wish to pursue, because I always believed in you and your potential, even when your mother tried to limit your time with me. Furthermore, Oliver continued, Mrs. Eleanor established a family emergency fund that could have been activated if any family member had faced true financial difficulties. Ironically, if Sarah had had real economic problems and had come to her mother with honesty, she would have received immediate help. Instead, she chose deception and manipulation. The contrast was devastating. I had prepared multiple ways to help my family if they needed it, but they had chosen the path of fraud instead of honesty. Your Honor, I continued, I want it to be understood that my decision to keep my wealth a secret was not a whim or paranoia. It was a deliberate strategy to protect my family from the corrupting effects of easy money and to teach them values like hard work and humility. Unfortunately, my experiment revealed that those values were never truly learned. Sarah stood up tremblingly. Mom, please, I know I made terrible mistakes, but you're my mother. You'll always be my mother. There's no way to fix this. Her voice was filled with genuine desperation, but I could also detect something else. The realization that she had lost not only my love, but also any possibility of benefiting from my estate. Sarah, I replied in a calm but firm voice, being a mother doesn't mean tolerating any abuse. Being a mother doesn't mean allowing my children to treat me as if I were less than human. Being a mother doesn't mean sacrificing my dignity to maintain family peace. For months you humiliated me, you lied to me, you conspired against me, and you used your own daughter in your scheme. Those actions have consequences. The judge had been observing this exchange with professional attention. "Mrs. Eleanor, I understand that this situation has been profoundly painful for you. What is your wish with respect to these proceedings and your family?" It was the question I had been waiting for, the opportunity to definitively establish how I wanted things to proceed. "Your Honor," I replied, "I request that these guardianship proceedings be dismissed with prejudice, which means they cannot be restarted. I request that the possible fraudulent presentation of evidence be investigated, and I request protective measures to ensure that my granddaughter Emily is not used again as a pawn in her mother's manipulations." Every word was calculated and definitive. "Furthermore," I continued, "I have made the decision to completely revise my estate planning. Today's events have shown that some people in my family are not prepared to handle important financial or family responsibilities." The message was clear. Sarah had lost not only the legal battle, but possibly her inheritance as well. The judge took his gavel and struck the table with authority. "After reviewing all the evidence presented, this court finds that Mrs. Eleanor is fully mentally and financially capable of managing her own affairs. The guardianship proceedings are dismissed with prejudice." The sound of the gavel resonated like a victory bell, but my heart was filled with sadness rather than triumph. I had won the legal battle, but I had lost my daughter in the process. "Furthermore," the judge continued in a severe voice, "this court is deeply concerned about the nature of the accusations presented against Mrs. Eleanor. The evidence suggests that there was a deliberate attempt to misrepresent the facts to gain control over the assets of a competent person. I am ordering that a copy of these proceedings be sent to the district attorney's office for a possible investigation into attempted fraud." Sarah completely collapsed upon hearing the word fraud. The legal implications of what she had done began to hit her with full force. Not only had she lost any possibility of controlling my assets, but now she faced the possibility of criminal charges. David seemed to be in shock, probably mentally calculating how this situation would affect his own reputation and career. "Your Honor," Oliver said, "I would like to request that a temporary restraining order be issued to prevent any future attempts at harassment or manipulation toward Mrs. Eleanor or her minor granddaughter." It was a measure we had discussed previously. After months of psychological pressure and manipulation, I needed formal legal protection. The judge nodded. "Granted. A temporary restraining order is issued prohibiting Sarah and David from contacting Mrs. Eleanor or approaching her residence without her express consent. Any violation of this order will result in immediate arrest." Sarah sobbed upon hearing this. The reality that she had lost not only the right to my money, but also the right to see me, finally hit her completely. I rose slowly and walked toward Emily, who was still sitting at the back of the room with tears streaming down her cheeks. "Emily, my love, come here." She stood up and ran toward me, hugging me with a desperation that broke my heart. "Grandma, I'm so sorry. I didn't know Mom was lying about you. I didn't know you were going to be hurt by what I said." Her words were choked by sobs. "My beautiful child," I whispered in her ear. "You have nothing to apologize for. You were honest when asked about our conversations. The problem wasn't your words, but how the adults used them." I hugged her tighter, feeling her tremble in my arms. "And I want you to know that none of this changes the love I feel for you. You will always be my beloved granddaughter." Sarah approached hesitantly. "Mom, please, don't take Emily away from me. She's my daughter." Her voice was pleading, but I held my firm position. "Sarah, Emily will still be your daughter, but you have shown that you are willing to use her as a weapon against her own family. I need time to evaluate what kind of relationship will be safe for her in the future." The words were harsh but necessary. "Your Honor," I intervened, "I request that supervised visits be established between Emily and her mother until it can be adequately assessed whether the environment is emotionally safe for the minor." The judge considered the petition. "Given the evidence of manipulation of the minor in these proceedings, I consider it a reasonable precaution. Psychological evaluation is ordered to determine the minor's best interest. David finally found his voice, although it trembled noticeably. Mrs. Eleanor, is there any way we can resolve this as a family? Without courts? Without lawyers? But I stopped him with a glacial look. David, you had the opportunity to resolve this as a family for 2 years. Instead, you chose conspiracy and deception. Some decisions are irreversible. Oliver approached and handed me a folder. Eleanor, these are the documents we discussed. Are you sure you want to proceed? I nodded firmly. It was time to make the most difficult decisions of my life, but also the most necessary. Yes, Oliver, it's time for everyone to understand the full consequences of their actions. I opened the folder and took out several legal documents. Your Honor, these are documents that establish important changes in my will and estate planning. After today's events, I have decided to completely revise how my inheritance will be distributed. Sarah turned even paler, if that was possible. She was finally beginning to understand the true cost of her betrayal. Sarah, I said, looking her directly in the eyes, for 40 years I worked to build an estate that I could leave to my family. I dreamed of the day I could reveal everything I had achieved and see pride and gratitude in their eyes. Instead, I discovered that my own daughter was willing to declare me incompetent to steal what she believed were my only assets. Every word was like a sentence being pronounced. Therefore, I continued, I have made the decision to substantially modify my testamentary plans. The portion I had allocated for you will be redirected to Emily's educational trust and to charitable organizations that help elderly victims of family abuse. Sarah put her hands to her mouth, stifling a cry of desperation. The financial reality of her betrayal finally hit her with full force. Grandma, Emily said in a small voice, you don't have to change anything for me. I just want you to be okay. Her genuine concern for my well-being, in contrast to her mother's greed, was like a ray of light in the darkness of this terrible day. Emily, my love, this is not punishment for you. It's protection for you. Your mother has shown that she is willing to use her own family to get money. I cannot allow you to have to face that pressure in the future. Sarah's lawyer made one last desperate attempt. Your Honor, my client is obviously under extreme emotional stress. Perhaps family mediation sessions could be considered, but the judge stopped him immediately. Counselor, your client tried to defraud her own mother. There is no mediation possible for that. Mrs. Eleanor's decisions about her estate are entirely hers, and this court fully respects them. Sarah finally broke down completely. Mom, I'm begging you. I know I made terrible mistakes, but I'm your daughter. You raised me. There must be some love left. Her words were filled with genuine pain, but also with a desperation that revealed her main concern was still financial. Sarah, I replied in a tired voice. Love doesn't disappear, but trust does. And without trust, there can be no real relationship. Furthermore, I continued, you need to understand that the consequences of your actions go beyond money. You have damaged your relationship with Emily, who now knows that her mother is willing to lie and manipulate to get what she wants. You have damaged your relationship with me in a way that could be irreparable, and you have damaged your own integrity in a way that you will have to live with forever. The judge stood up, indicating that the hearing was over. Mrs. Eleanor, this court wishes you the best in the future. It is clear that you are a woman of extraordinary resources, both financial and personal. I hope you can find peace after this traumatic experience. His words were kind, but they could not heal the pain of the family betrayal I had experienced. As we left the courtroom, Emily walked beside me, still clinging to my arm. Sarah and David walked behind us, defeated and humiliated. The irony of the situation did not escape me. I had won a complete legal battle. I had protected my estate and my autonomy, but I had lost my daughter in the process. It was a victory that tasted like ashes in my mouth. Upon leaving the courthouse, Oliver accompanied me to his car, while Emily clung to my arm as if she feared I would disappear. The sunlight seemed strangely bright after the dark hours we had spent inside. "Eleanor," Oliver said softly to me, "are you sure about the decisions you made in there? Once these documents are processed, it will be very difficult to reverse the changes." I nodded firmly. "Oliver, we've been discussing this moment for years. I hoped it would never be necessary, but Sarah forced me to make this decision." Emily turned to me with fresh tears in her eyes. "Grandma, what's going to happen now? I won't be able to see Mom anymore." Her question broke my heart because it revealed the confusion and pain of a teenager caught in adult conflict. "My love," I told her, sitting on a bench near the courthouse to be at her level, "you will always be able to see your mom. But for now, until things calm down, visits will have to be supervised to protect you." "Protect me from what?" Emily asked, although I think she already knew the answer. "To protect you from being used as a weapon again. My child, your mom asked you questions about me and used your answers to try to hurt me. That's not right, and I'm not going to let it happen again." Emily nodded slowly, showing a maturity that impressed and saddened me at the same time. No teenager should have to understand these family complexities. Behind us, I could hear Sarah and David arguing in low voices. Fragments of their conversation reached me. "How did you not know? You also thought she was poor. Now we face criminal charges because of you. She was your mother. You should have known." It was pathetic to hear them blame each other instead of accepting responsibility for their own actions. Even in defeat, they could not show an ounce of dignity. Sarah finally approached us, walking slowly, as if each step pained her. "Mom," she said in a broken voice, "I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but could you explain why? Why did you keep everything a secret for so many years? Why did you let us believe you were poor?" It was a valid question, although it came decades too late. I got up from the bench and looked at her directly. "Sarah, do you really want to know why?" She nodded desperately. "Because I wanted to raise a daughter who would be a good person, regardless of whether she had money or not. I wanted you to work for your own achievements, to develop character, to understand the value of things. I wanted you to love me for who I was, not for what I could give you." My voice broke slightly. "And I wanted to protect you from becoming exactly what you became today." "But Mom," Sarah protested, "if you had told us the truth—" "What?" I interrupted her. "Would you have worked just as hard in your career? Would you have appreciated the things you achieved on your own? Would you have developed humility and empathy? Sarah, look what you did when you thought I had nothing. Imagine what you would have done if you had known I had millions." Emily approached her mother hesitantly. "Mom, why did you do that to Grandma? She has always been good to you." My granddaughter's innocent question was like a slap to Sarah. How could she explain to her own daughter that she had tried to steal from her grandmother? How could she justify years of manipulation and lies? "Emily, I thought I was helping," Sarah began, but her daughter interrupted her. "No, Mom, you knew Grandma was fine. I told you many times that she remembered everything, that she was perfectly lucid, that she didn't need help, but you didn't listen to me because you didn't want to listen." Emily's wisdom at 16 was devastating in its simplicity. Oliver discreetly approached. "Eleanor, do you want us to take Emily home? I think it's been enough for today." I nodded gratefully. My granddaughter had experienced too much adult drama in one day. "Emily, my love, would you like to come home with me tonight? We can order pizza and watch movies like old times." Her eyes lit up for the first time all day. "Can I, Grandma? Really?" Sarah stiffened. "Emily is my daughter. She has to come home with me." But I held my firm position. "Sarah, the court order says visits must be supervised. Tonight I'll supervise. Tomorrow we'll discuss more permanent arrangements." The expression on Sarah's face was one of pure pain, but I wasn't going to give in on this. Emily needed emotional stability after today's trauma. "Besides," I continued, I think you and David need time to discuss the legal implications of what happened today. The judge mentioned a criminal investigation. You should probably consult a criminal attorney." The reality of her legal situation hit Sarah like a cold wave. She had been so focused on the emotional aspect of losing my love and her inheritance that she had momentarily forgotten that she might face prison time. David approached with a panicked face. "Mrs. Eleanor, is there any way you could talk to the prosecutor? You could tell them you don't want to press charges." It was incredible. Even after everything that had happened, he still expected me to save him from the consequences of his own actions. "David," I replied with a bitter smile, "you and Sarah created this situation with your lies and manipulations. Now you will have to face the consequences like adults." "But think about Emily," Sarah said desperately. "If I go to prison, what will happen to her?" It was the first time all day she had mentioned her daughter as anything more than a tool to gain sympathy. "Sarah, you should have thought about Emily before deciding to defraud her grandmother. You should have thought about Emily before manipulating her to obtain false testimony. You should have thought about Emily before risking your family's stability out of greed." Emily looked at me with sad but determined eyes. "Grandma, I can live with you if Mom has to go away." The question was simple, but loaded with enormous implications. "Emily, my love, you will always have a home with me. No matter what happens, you will be safe and loved." I hugged her tight, feeling her relax in my arms for the first time in months. "His Honor established that we need psychological evaluations," I reminded Sarah. "I suggest you use that time to truly reflect on your actions and decisions, not just about money, but about what kind of mother and person you want to be in the future." It was my last attempt to reach some decency in my daughter, although my hopes were very low. Oliver opened his car door. "Eleanor, are you ready to go?" I nodded, but before getting into the car, I turned to Sarah one last time. "Sarah, throughout your life, I gave you unconditional love. I gave you security, education, values, and a home full of affection. Today, I discovered that when you thought I had nothing left to give you, you decided to take away even my dignity and my autonomy. That is a lesson about your character that I will never forget." Tears streamed down Sarah's cheeks as we drove away. In the rearview mirror, I could see her standing alone on the courthouse steps, with David beside her, but clearly distanced. They had gotten exactly what they deserved. They had each other and the misery they had created together. It was an image that would haunt me for a long time, not out of pity for them, but out of sadness for what could have been if they had chosen love over greed. 3 months have passed since that terrible day in court, and my life has found a new normal that I never imagined possible. Emily now lives with me permanently after psychological evaluations determined it was best for her emotional well-being. My house, which Sarah described as a pauper's home, is now filled with teenage laughter, music, friends who come to study, and a vital energy that had been absent for too long. This morning, as I prepared breakfast, Emily ran downstairs with a big smile. "Grandma, guess what? I was accepted into the student exchange program in France. I can go!" Her enthusiasm was contagious, and seeing how she had blossomed in these months away from her mother's toxicity was one of the few good things that had come out of this terrible situation. "Of course you can go, my love. That's what your educational trust is for." The criminal investigation against Sarah and David had resulted in charges of attempted fraud and elder financial abuse. Sarah received 2 years of probation and 500 hours of community service at a retirement home, which I found ironically appropriate. David received a similar sentence, but also temporarily lost his professional license. Both had had to sell their house to pay fines and legal fees. Emily still visited her mother twice a week under supervision, but it was clear that the relationship had changed forever. My granddaughter had matured in ways that broke my heart, understanding realities about her family that no teenager should have to face. "Grandma," she told me one afternoon while we were doing homework together, "do you think Mom really loves me, or did she just use me to get your money?" The question deeply hurt me because I had struggled with the same doubt about Sarah's love for me. Emily, I think your mom loves you in her own way, but she made very bad decisions that hurt the whole family. Sometimes the people we love disappoint us, and we have to learn to love them from a distance to protect ourselves. It was a tough lesson for a young woman, but a necessary one. Oliver came to visit us every week, not only to review my finances, but because he had become a father figure for Emily and a dear friend to me. Eleanor, he told me during one of his visits, I've been thinking about the foundation we discussed. Are you ready to make that a reality? We had talked about creating a foundation to help elderly victims of family abuse, and after my experience, it had become a personal passion. Yes, Oliver, I want my experience to serve something positive. If my pain can help other elders protect themselves from greedy families, then it will be worth it. The Eleanor Foundation had been officially established last week with an initial fund of $100,000. It would provide free legal services and psychological support for elders facing financial abuse from their own families. One afternoon, while Emily was at school, I received an unexpected call. It was Sarah. Her voice sounded different, more humble, more broken. Mom, could you come see me? There are things I need to tell you. I had been waiting for this call for months. Sarah, you know I have a restraining order. I can't see you without supervision. I know, she replied. I've arranged for us to meet at my therapist's office. There are things I need to confess to you. I decided to go more out of curiosity than hope for reconciliation. The therapist's office was a neutral and safe place. When I arrived, Sarah was sitting on a sofa looking much older than she was. The stress of the past few months had taken its physical and emotional toll. Mom, thank you for coming. Her first words were filled with genuine tears. I need you to know the complete truth. The truth, Sarah continued, is that David and I had been having financial problems for 2 years. We had made bad investments, had credit card debts, and were about to lose our house. When Dad died, we thought your house would be the solution to our problems. It was a confession I had been waiting for, the admission that everything had been about money from the beginning. But Mom, she continued with tears streaming down her cheeks, the part I'm most ashamed of is that I knew you weren't senile. I knew you were perfectly fine, but I was so desperate, so scared of losing everything, that I convinced David that we could argue mental incompetence. We thought it would be easy because you're older and live alone. The brutal honesty of her confession was both painful and liberating. And Emily? I asked. Emily never knew what we were planning. I manipulated her without her realizing it. I asked her innocent questions about you and then distorted her answers. She really believed she was helping to protect you. At least my granddaughter had been as innocent as I thought. It was a small comfort amidst so much betrayal. Sarah, I said after a long silence, I appreciate your honesty, but it comes very late. For months, you made me feel as if I was losing my mind. You made me doubt my own competence. You humiliated me in front of strangers and almost took away my autonomy. An apology cannot undo that damage. My voice was firm, but not cruel. I had found peace in the truth, but not forgetting. I know, Sarah responded. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I realize how terrible I was, and I wanted to ask you if there's any way Emily can benefit from the trust you established without me being included. She doesn't deserve to be punished for my mistakes. It was the first time Sarah had genuinely put her daughter's interests above her own. Emily is already benefiting from the trust, I informed her. Her education is fully paid for, including college and graduate studies. She also has a fund that will be activated when she turns 25 to help her establish herself in adult life. All this is protected from any influence from you or David. The relief in Sarah's eyes was palpable. Mom, is there any possibility that someday you can forgive me? Her question was pleading, but I had thought a lot about this. Sarah, forgiveness is something that is earned, not something that is asked for. If you truly want my forgiveness, show it by being a better mother to Emily, by being a better person in general, and by living with the consequences of your actions without blaming others. Perhaps, in a few years, we can talk about forgiveness. When I left that office, I felt a chapter of my life close. Sarah had shown more honesty in an hour than in previous years, but the damage was done. Some relationships can be repaired, others can only be regretted. I had chosen to focus on building something new and positive with Emily instead of trying to repair something that was fundamentally broken. That night, as Emily and I had dinner together, I told her about my encounter with her mother. "Do you think Mom has really changed?" she asked me. "I think your mom finally understands what she lost," I replied. "But real change takes time and actions, not just words." Emily nodded wisely, showing once again that maturity the situation had forced her to develop. "Grandma," Emily said after a moment, "I want you to know that I'm very happy living with you. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I have a stable family." Her words filled my heart with a warmth I hadn't felt in years. I had lost a daughter, but I had gained the opportunity to be the grandmother I always wanted to be. Now, as I write this story, I can see Emily in the garden talking on the phone with her friends about her plans for France. The house is full of life again, of future plans, of hope. My estate continues to grow under Oliver's wise administration, and now a significant part of it is destined to help others who have gone through experiences similar to mine. I learned that money really reveals people's character, but not always in the way we expect. Sometimes it reveals the worst in those we think we know, and sometimes it reveals strengths in ourselves that we didn't know we had. In the end, my experiment of keeping my wealth a secret worked perfectly. It showed me exactly who each person in my family was when they thought I had nothing to give them. The lesson was painful, but invaluable. And now, with Emily by my side and a renewed purpose in my life, I can say that knowing the truth was worth it, no matter how bitter it was. If you enjoyed my story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can write more stories like this. Thanks a lot in advance. What about you? What would you do in this person's shoes? I'd really love to hear your thoughts, so drop them in the comments. I'm always curious to know what you think. Oh, and let me know where you've heard this story. If you want to hear more life stories like this, like the video and subscribe to my channel. There are many more waiting for you. Big hugs and see you next time.